I'm John Michael Lander, a former Olympic diving contender and sex abuse survivor. As a 14-year-old Olympic-bound athlete, the adults that were entrusted with my training groomed and silenced me into shame and guilt. And I continued on, and I still won gold medals at the Norway and the Danish Cups. So that's basically the whole story in a nutshell. I grew up on a farm in this really old farmhouse that was built in 1865. And so I had this whole area to play with, and I used to do flips and somersaults and jump off things. And my parents thought it might be a good idea to take me down to the pool, the local pool, and, wear me out, I guess. And when I went down there, I started to do these things off the board, and there was a lifeguard there and said, you need to do this, and you need to go to this person right here. And so he connected me with a coach. And so we went there that afternoon, and he taught me a couple more dives. We went to a meet that evening, and I took second. And so we thought that this could be something to explore. And that's how the diving started happening. And I was 12 when that all started. And by 14, I had qualified for the Junior Olympics and took 8th. And by taking 8th, there was an article that ran through the newspaper locally, and a lawyer saw it, and he contacted my mother. And he started to meet with my mother, a couple of times over the next 3 months. They would have coffee, or they would have, a little dinner. And he basically started to share with my mother that he had this group of professional friends that could help with the diving expenses if my mother agreed to this. He also started to, go further with it by telling my mother that this probably would be the only way that I could ever go to the Olympics and get a scholarship was through their help and their support, because diving is really expensive. And so my mother started to listen to this, and so she agreed. But this again was after months and months and months that he had groomed her and talked with her. What we didn't know until later on is that he had already talked to my team and my coach, and basically told the team and the administrators at the team that he had this group of sponsors, professionals, who would sponsor the team. But they were really focused on me, and that they would help pay for everything if they had agreed that they could be part of the sponsorship. And so the team said, sure. So basically what had happened is what this lawyer did was created what I call the predatory grooming trifecta, is where he groomed the institution first, then my parents. And it wasn't until he had those two organizations and my parents in order, then he came and spoke to me and started taking me out to dinner and talking to me and telling me that, this is the only way you're going to make it. And so I started to believe him. I also realized that, my parents were not, going through some struggles with finances. And one of the things that the lawyer promised my mother was that any professional that I was connected with, they would help the family, sort of doctor appointments, medication, anything like that. And my youngest sister had a terrible sledding accident and had to have reconstructive surgery on her chin. Everything was going to be taken care of if we agreed to this. And so that's how that all kind of worked out. I agreed. He told me that there was 3 things that I had to do for him. One was to do as the best I can in competition and win as many titles as I can. The second was to do the best that I could in school and keep an A average. And 3, just make sure that the professionals were happy with me so that they wouldn't be disappointed and go back and tell him how upset he was. So I agreed. And so he created a contract. And one of the other things I had to agree to is that I couldn't talk about this. I wasn't allowed to tell anybody about this, because what he told me was I was the only one on the team that they were interested in, because I had already took 8th at the Junior Olympics and qualified for 2 international meets. And I was going to go and start representing the United States. And so that's all that they worried about. And so I agreed. I signed the contract. And so things started to happen. And what basically happened is that he started to introduce me to these other professionals, one at a time at first. And I would go and have dinner with them. And then, of course, that would lead to something else. And I didn't understand it. I was scared. I was frightened. I didn't really know what was happening. I had not had any sexual experience until this moment. I realized that I started to normalize everything, that this was what was going to take for me to become an Olympian and my dreams. So I kind of just thought this is what I was supposed to do. And I remember one night on my 16th birthday, this had been going on for now 2 years. And I finally broke down and I told my mother I couldn't go. And she asked me why. And I finally said, he touches me. And she didn't understand what that meant. So I kind of showed the area. And then she looked at me really funny and got a serious expression on her face. And then she slapped me across the face. And she said, it's not nice to make up lies about people. This is a prominent person in the community, and he is helping us. If anything ever happened, it must have been your fault. You go have dinner with this person, and you come back and you tell me what you had for dinner. And as I was walking out of the house, I told myself at that moment, if my mother wasn't going to believe me, no one else would. And so that's where I became very silent about it and kept, everything within myself. These events started to grow. I would be invited to certain parties, and at these parties, there would be 5, 6 young men. I tended to be the youngest. I was in high school, the others were in college, and they would give us certain outfits to wear. I always had to wear a white Speedo. I think it was because I was the diver, I'm not sure. But we would line up, and as the guests would come through, they would come down through the line and look at us, ask questions, touch us, kind of like size us up. And then they would go in the back room and they would place a silent bid on which kid that they wanted. And at the end, the bidder that had the highest bid for which one of us would get that person for the night or for the week or however long that they had agreed to. And there was also incentives for the boy to have the highest amount of money raised. That would mean more money coming to him, tuition paid, room and board paid, or whatever. And most of the guys who were college age were being taken care of that way. We were called ponies, and the older guys, there was a grad student, and he was called a horse. So that's how we were kind of labeled, and that's how we knew where we fit in this pecking order. So that's kind of exactly what happened. This went on all 4 years of my high school. They were a group of professionals who were very protective of each other and took care of each other. There were lawyers, there were judges, there were police officers, therapists, medicals, doctors, all these people. And so what happened is once I became part of this group, there was only one doctor I was allowed to go see, and that was a doctor at the university. So I was brought onto campus as a teenager and abused by this doctor in his office on campus. And for an example, another way this all protected, one of the guys crashed a Mercedes, and there was on the seat with him. And so the police officers brought him in, and they were going to charge him for possession. Well, the professionals came in, they talked to the police officers, made a donation, and that whole case disappeared. Other things that we knew, we were told we weren't allowed to talk about it, we weren't allowed to talk to each other, and they kept us separated about that. One of the guys, I do remember, started to ask questions, and he disappeared, and we never knew what happened to him. We knew that he was taken out of the university, we knew that he was put somewhere else, we don't know where though. So that kind of gives you the whole background of what's going on. By the time I was 14 and I qualified for the Junior Olympics and took 8th, that's when the lawyer walks in and offers this incredible gift to my parents, especially to my mother, which would help every way. And that's all she saw. She saw this is going to help him. This will take care of all the finances. This will take care of travel. This will take care of practices and paying for the coach. And later on, we discovered that the lawyer had also met with the coach and started to give him extra incentives and money to pay attention to me. And so that's how this whole thing was kind of orchestrated. Well, I'll try to put it all encapsulated in one day for you, the first experience. Now, you got to understand that before this, I did have dinner with some professionals, and that was all it was. It was either a dinner or go see a movie or something like that. So it all started out as very innocent in a way. So on this one particular day, I got up in the morning, went to practice for 2 hours, went to school, did the whole school thing, and then went back to practice for 2 more hours, came home. My mother had me get dressed in a certain outfit, and then she waited by the door because the professional would come in up the driveway and pick me up at the farmhouse. And I had to be ready at the exact time that they told her, and everything was going smoothly. I went, and this time we didn't go to dinner. We didn't go see a show. We didn't do anything. He was a medical person. I don't remember exactly what his profession was, but I do know that he was in the medical field. We went to a Motel 6, and I found myself, that was the first time inside my stomach, I said, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right. And I kind of asked, and he said, it's okay. You know, the lawyer knew that I was here and knew where I was. If anything happened, he would help us out. And so I followed through because I had practiced being the good boy this whole time. So that part was normal for me. So I went in, and it was one of those things where I had never experienced that this person started telling me how attractive I was, how lucky I was, how special I was that these professionals wanted to help me. And so he completely created this world that I was this unique unicorn kind of thing. And that it was such an honor that he was with me. And then he basically started slowly moving, touching me and taking my shirt and taking it off. I started to panic. I remember it was one of those, I couldn't move. My body went into a complete frozen state as I watched him. And I felt like I left my body, actually. And I kind of like went into the corner of the ceiling and was just looking down at what was happening. And it was like I couldn't believe what was happening because I could actually see it. At that point, I had no idea what sex was. I didn't know what was happening. Problem that I was experiencing is that my body was responding, which was really confusing to me because I was not attracted to this person. He was in his 60s. He had a really hard pot belly. He had really skinny legs, and I can remember varicose veins going through them. And at this point, I started counting things to help me get through what I thought the next thing would be. And he would always remind me, he said, I know the lawyer told you have to do everything I ask you to do, so just keep following my lead. And when it was completely over, I remember just sitting there on the side of the bed, completely numb, and he was standing in the bathroom in this really torn up Motel 6, and I didn't know what to do. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I kept trying to understand what just happened, and I couldn't figure out why. And I think that was the biggest thing that I kept trying to ask myself, why is this happening to me? I mean, I had heard what sex is, but I had never experienced it and never thought I'd be experiencing it with such an older person. And so I didn't know if this was real or not. And I remember him coming back to me, and he was smiling, and I remember him looking at me, and he says, I have something for you. And I thought, okay, great, this is it. He's going to kill me, because this is done. I'm done. And he went to his jacket and he reached into the pocket and he pulled something out. And when he turned around, I closed my eyes because I thought that I didn't want to see the gun if that's what it was. And he kind of laughed and he says, God, you're really, really cute and innocent. Here, open your eyes. And there was an envelope in his hand. And he says, I know that you give everything back to your mother when you go home, but you can't give this to your mother. This is for you, and you must keep this for you. And he said, take it. And I wouldn't take it. I don't know why. I kind of just said, no, thank you. I don't want anything. He says, you have to take it. I eventually took it and opened it up, and there were four $20 bills in there. And I was like, oh my God. He says, you cannot give this to your mother, because if you do, I'll come back and take it back. And so that was it. And then he drove me home, and I walked in, and I had to tell my mother what happened, because that was the part of the deal. And so I realized that I started lying. I made up a dinner. I didn't tell her anything about the hotel, and I didn't tell her what happened. And so I started this whole moment of trying to figure out in my teenage mind what was going on. What did this mean? And then I started questioning my own things. Does this mean I'm gay? Does this mean that I'm a perv? All these questions were popping in my head. And I could remember my father, who was very religious, would throw out Bible verses to me. And he would say stuff like, if you lie with another man, you're an abomination. And those thoughts would just ring through my head constantly. And so I started to find that I started to disassociate with myself, if that makes sense. I found myself putting in categories. I was going to be the good son. I was the student. I was the athlete. And then I found myself being the sinner when I had to be. And I would allow myself to take on these different personalities to fit the situation I was in. The professionals started the abuse and the grooming and all that when I was 14. And so, but I had met the lawyer earlier than that. So I met him at 13, but 14 is when everything started to happen. So the full 4 years of high school was dealing with professionals. I started to figure out that I can make my escape, I thought was my escape, was to apply for schools as far away as I could. 2 schools that I got accepted into were the University of Hawaii and the University of California, Irvine, which were pretty far away, and from Ohio. And I realized that I wasn't going to be able to go to Hawaii just because the finances and everything. So I applied, I got a athletic and an academic scholarship to the University of California. So that's where I decided to go. And I thought that everything was done at that point. But what I had not realized or even taken into consideration is that my mother was still in connections with the lawyer who was still involved with the professionals. And they were giving my mother money to give me for my room and board, for any other incidentals. They still were in connection with me. And the other thing that I happened, just to let you understand, is that by not getting the professional help I needed through my high school years, when I went to my freshman year, I repeated situations and scenarios. And without realizing I was, a grad student started to stalk me and follow me. And I had no idea what this meant. And started leaving notes on my dorm room door, on my locker room, at practice, on my gym bag. And he literally lured me in one night, took care, abused me. And the next morning I found myself in the wooded area on campus and had to go to the emergency room. And at the emergency room, I experienced my first experience of being victimized again by the medical people, because they wanted to know where my parents were, and I begged them not to call my parents or talk to them. They had to do a rape kit, and that was my fault. I caused all this, and it was just this horrendous experience. And so I went back to my dorm room after it was over, and I got extremely sick. I couldn't eat. It was just crazy. I couldn't understand that I could go through 4 years of abuse by all these professionals, and then this one grad student caused me to fall apart. It was like, that last little thing that broke the camel's back. There I was. So I had to go back home. And so my mother contacted the lawyers. They got me a flight home. I went back home. I was back in the circle. And that's how I got back into it. And I was really, really resistant about it. I really not happy. By this point, I knew this was wrong. And I went to the local school, the local university, and I met a teacher there who was a dance teacher, and because she thought that I could dance, and we started talking, and she was from New York, and she brought me into her office, and she says, "I know the look in your eyes. Tell me what's going on." She was the first adult that ever asked me what was going on. So I slowly started to share my story with her. And she was the one that started to help me find my escape. While I was in California, I was pretty well known because I had won several gold medals and everyone who I was on campus. And I met this young girl who was a theater major, and she asked me to audition with her for the fall play. And so I said, sure, why not? Well, what I didn't know at the same time is that they were auditioning for a movie of the week. And so they were using the same audition time periods for both projects. And I got cast in both. And unfortunately, she did not. But we remained very close friends. And from the movie of the week, I ended up getting extra work on General Hospital, the soap opera. Well, this dance teacher contacted the casting agent at General Hospital and said, "Will you take him back? We're trying to get him back to California." They said, "Yes, we'll give him more extra work." And then they found a place for me to live. And that was where everything went. I did this one night. They told me, "You're leaving right now. This is your plane ticket. You're going. Your mom doesn't know where you are. No one knows where you are. Go." And that's how it all ended for me. I think the healing process, and I really want everyone to understand this, a healing process for a survivor is lifelong. It will go on for the rest of our lives, because there are always these little triggers that pop up everywhere. And I think people think that if there's retribution or revenge, sort of like in the Nasser case that he goes to prison, that these young women should feel justified. But what they're forgetting is that these young women now have to face a lifetime of healing, a lifetime of understanding why this happened, a lifetime of trying to forgive themselves for allowing themselves to be in a situation like this, and a lifetime of trying to understand that it wasn't their fault, because we all believe it's our fault. This would never have happened unless we allowed it to happen. That's what we're conditioned to believe. So it's a constant battle. Each survivor's journey is unique and individualized, and every solution doesn't work for everyone. I had a problem with therapists because some of the professionals were therapists. And so for me to go into a therapist's office, I'm right back where I was, and I can relive those moments, the abuse that happened in there. So I got to the point that where therapy wasn't good for me until I met one therapist who really thought outside the box. And I write about her in my books. And she was more of a life coach than a therapist. And so she started to had me start to journal and start connecting that way. She used the artist way. She introduced me to this book called The Artist Way, and we practiced that because she knew that what was a normal situation was not going to work for me. And so she started to think outside the box for me, which helped me immensely. And then unfortunately, she retired before I was finished. And so I had to start to look for a new one. I was introduced to an institution called the Self-Talk Institute. And it was through this and Patricia Wright, who started working with me and took me and told me that all I had to do was think about where I am today and about the negative thoughts and what I processed and created to create this negative self person inside of me. And I didn't have to go back to relive incidences until I was ready for it. So basically what the self-talk does is gives me back my power, gives me the power to navigate, to find my way, to start to peel back the onion and find the layers, and to reintroduce myself to the child that I was before this all happened, and to realize all the successes I had during the abuse. Because I think a lot of times as survivors, those years when all this abuse has happened, we block out everything. Yes, I would say the first thing, and this is directly more to male survivors, but I think it encapsulates everyone. You have to acknowledge and recognize that the abuse happened and it was real. That is the first step. The second step and steps after that will fall in place. But after acknowledging it and realizing that it happened, you will start having memories. You will start having flashbacks of the event itself because you've allowed your brain to say, yes, this is real. And I highly recommend that you find a professional to help you navigate through this. And it could be whoever you want it to be. It could be a therapist. It could be a social worker, whoever you can connect with, and to let you know that the first person you meet may not be the right person. And make sure that you follow the instincts that you feel so that you feel safe and protected, because you're going to be vulnerable. You're going to open up yourself to this person. Are they the person you want to open up to? And so that's another thing to follow through. And the other thing I want to say is you are heard and you are believed. And many times, and I've struggled with this myself, everyone keeps saying you're not alone, but I always felt that I was alone. And I think the thing that is what's really, really important is that you need to start going more in towards yourself, inward, to find answers and to find yourself. Because when you find yourself, then you really are never alone. I think so many of us and our society depicts that we need to look outside of ourselves for help and stuff like that, which we do for certain things. But we also need to go back within ourselves and to find that inner child that was abused, or that inner person that was hurt, because abuse of any kind is out there. Traumatic experiences can be of any kind, which will cause us to disassociate from who we are. And we need to go back and become whole again. And once you do that, you'll start finding more ways and answers, and the path will start to open up. Sometimes our closest people are not the people we need to talk to, because they could be involved, like my mother was involved with this. And the thing is you need to find that instinct within you to find out who that person is to talk to. Like in my case, I found the person was a teacher. It could be a teacher. It could be a coach. I think you know instinctually who to talk to and who not to talk to. But if someone touches you or someone says something to you that makes you feel uncomfortable, say something.